Act 1. The Decision. Emily had been planning this trip for 3 months, ever since the divorce papers were finalized, not as some dramatic statement or cry for help, but because she needed to prove something to herself, that she could still do hard things alone, that she hadn't lost that part of herself somewhere in the last 8 years of compromise and careful navigation around someone else's moods. The winter camping permit for Cascade Ridge Trail sat on her passenger seat, already creased from the number of times she'd unfolded it to check the regulations. February wasn't the most popular season for backcountry camping in the Cascades, which was exactly why she'd chosen it. She wanted silence. She wanted the kind of cold that made you focus on the simple mechanics of survival rather than the loop of thoughts that had worn grooves in her mind. The trailhead parking lot was empty except for one other vehicle, a dark blue pickup with Oregon plates and a faded National Park sticker on the rear window. Emily pulled in 3 spaces away, habit from her years of city parking making her give the other car distance even though there were 40 empty spots available. It was 2:47 p.m. She had maybe 3.5 hours of daylight left, which was cutting it closer than she'd planned. The drive had taken longer than expected, a minor fender bender blocking one lane, about 40 miles back. But she'd hiked this trail before, years ago, with her college roommate, and she remembered the campsite was only about 4 miles in, manageable, even with the shortened daylight. The air hit her face like cold water when she opened the door, sharp, clean, completely still, the kind of cold that made her sinuses ache immediately. She'd packed well, though. Her gear list had been checked and rechecked. Good sleeping bag rated to -10, 4-season tent, chemical heat packs, enough food for 3 days even though she was only planning to stay 2 nights. As she hefted her pack from the trunk, she noticed something odd. There were boot prints in the thin layer of snow near the trail entrance, but they seemed to go in both directions, like someone had walked in, then walked back out, then maybe walked in again. The prints overlapped in places, making it hard to tell exactly how many trips had been made or how recently. She glanced at the blue pickup. The windows were fogged on the inside, which meant it had been sitting here for a while, long enough for the interior to equalize with the outside temperature. Emily tried the trailhead's information board, but most of the notices were old and sun-bleached, a warning about bear activity from last June, a reminder about permits, nothing about trail conditions or closures. Her phone had signal here, but she knew from experience it would die completely about 2 miles in when the ridge blocked the tower. She took a photo of her car and the trail sign, then texted it to her sister Rachel with a timestamp. Just a safety measure. Rachel wouldn't worry unless she didn't hear from Emily by Sunday evening, but it felt responsible to leave a digital breadcrumb. The trail began as a wide, well-maintained path cutting through dense Douglas fir. The snow was only a few inches deep here, not enough to require snowshoes yet. Emily fell into the rhythm easily, her breath creating small clouds that dissipated behind her. The pack felt good, heavy enough to know she was carrying what she needed, but well balanced. She'd forgotten how quiet winter trails were. Not silent, exactly. There was the crunch of her boots, the occasional crack of a branch somewhere in the forest, the white noise of wind in the high canopy, but no birds, no insects, nothing that spoke of other living things paying attention to her passage. At the 1-mile marker, the trail narrowed and began to climb. The trees pressed closer here, their snow-laden branches creating a tunnel effect. This was the section she remembered being harder than it looked on the map, a steady incline that burned the thighs and tested cardiovascular fitness. Emily paused to drink water and adjust her pack straps. The blue pickup was bothering her, though she couldn't articulate exactly why. Just a feeling, like seeing a chair pulled slightly away from a table in an otherwise neat room, something that suggested interrupted action. She checked the time. 3:24 p.m. Still good. The campsite she was aiming for had a few flat spots near a seasonal creek. Even if the creek was frozen, she had plenty of water with her. She could melt snow if needed. The trail continued upward. Emily's legs remembered this climb, even if her mind had softened the memory. It was the kind of sustained effort that forced you into the present tense, made philosophy and regret and planning all seem distant and irrelevant. There was just the next step, the next breath, the burn in your muscles, the cold air rasping in your throat. At the 2-mile point, she saw the first marker that something was off. There was a trekking pole lying across the trail, not dropped casually but placed deliberately, perpendicular to the path, the kind of thing you do if you were marking something or warning someone. Emily picked it up. It was a decent brand, Black Diamond, with the strap still attached, not damaged or broken. The adjustment clips were locked at a height setting for someone around 5 feet, 6 inches, close to her own height. She looked around. The forest pressed in on all sides, unchanging. There was no obvious trail branching off here, no reason someone would abandon a perfectly good trekking pole. She called out, her voice sounding flat and strange in the cold air. "Hello? Anyone out here?" The silence that came back felt thick somehow, expectant. Emily stood there for a long moment, the pole in her hand, trying to decide what to do. It wasn't hers to take, but leaving it seemed wasteful. Finally, she propped it carefully against a tree just off the trail, where it would be visible to anyone coming back to look for it. She pulled a small flag of red surveyor's tape from her pack and tied it to a branch above the pole, making it more noticeable. The shadows were getting longer. She needed to keep moving. Act 2. The campsite. The campsite appeared around 4:15 p.m., just as the light was starting to fail from gold to grey. It was exactly where Emily remembered it, a flat clearing about 30 feet off the trail, with a fire ring made of stacked stones and several tent platforms worn into the duff. But someone had been here recently, very recently. There were 2 tent platforms, and one of them showed clear signs of use. The snow had been cleared away in a neat rectangle about 7 feet by 5 feet. A few stones had been arranged in a deliberate pattern near where the tent door would have been. And there were ashes in the fire ring, not snow-covered, which meant a fire had burned here within the last few hours. Emily set her pack down slowly, scanning the entire clearing. The seasonal creek she remembered was there, frozen solid, a ribbon of white cutting through the trees about 20 feet from the camp. The forest around the clearing was dense, visibility maybe 30 feet in any direction. She walked around the perimeter, looking for any other signs of occupation. Boot prints, yes, lots of them. The same overlapping pattern she'd seen at the trailhead. But no tent, no gear, no pile of wood, no food bags hung in the trees. It was like someone had set up camp, built a fire, then packed everything up and left. Except if they'd left, she would have passed them on the trail. It was a single path with no branches or loops, unless they'd left before she arrived at the trailhead. But the ashes suggested otherwise. Emily checked her phone. No signal, as expected. The time showed 4:23 p.m. The light was fading fast now, that accelerated twilight that happens in the mountains in winter. She had maybe 20 minutes before she'd be working in full darkness. Decision time. She could turn back, try to make it out before dark. It would be a fast, potentially dangerous hike, rushing down a trail she'd only been on once before, years ago, in failing light. Or she could set up camp, except that she was sharing this spot with someone who might return, and deal with that social awkwardness when it happened. The rational part of her brain pointed out that there was nothing actually threatening here. Boot prints and ashes and a cleared tent platform weren't evidence of danger, just evidence of another camper, probably someone doing exactly what she was doing. But something felt wrong. That trekking pole on the trail, the truck at the trailhead with fogged windows, the way these boot prints suggested multiple trips but no obvious purpose for them. Emily made herself take a breath. She was tired, running on emotion and divorce adrenaline, and her judgment was probably compromised. The sensible thing was to set up her tent, make dinner, and get into her sleeping bag before the real cold settled in. In the morning, with better light and better perspective, she'd figure out if there was actually anything to worry about. She chose the other tent platform, the one without signs of recent use, and began the familiar ritual of setting up camp. Tent first, staked securely even though there was no wind, sleeping bag and pad arranged inside, food bag organized and hung on the bare cables that had been installed at this site years ago. Water bottles filled from her supply, one set aside to bring into the tent. By the time she had her camp stove assembled and water boiling for a freeze-dried meal, it was full dark. Her headlamp created a cone of light that made everything outside it seem even darker by comparison. The forest had become a wall of black, complete and total. Emily ate her dinner sitting on a flat rock near the fire ring, not bothering to build a fire herself. Too much work for a solo camper, and she didn't want to announce her presence more than necessary. The food was tasteless, but hot, and that was enough. She was just finishing, scraping the last bits of beef stroganoff from the pouch, when she heard it. Footsteps. Not close, but not far either. The distinctive crunch slide of someone walking in snow, maybe 50 or 60 feet away, deeper in the forest, moving parallel to the camp. Emily turned off her headlamp instantly, then felt stupid for doing it. Whoever was out there already knew she was here. Her tent was obviously occupied. Her bear bag was hanging. Turning off the light just made her blind. She turned it back on, stood up, and called out, "Hello. I'm camped here for the night." The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was different from the earlier quiet. This was the silence of someone listening, someone deciding. "There's plenty of room if you need a spot." Emily tried again, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm on the east platform." Nothing. No response. But also no more footsteps. Emily waited for what felt like 5 minutes but was probably 90 seconds. Her heart was doing something complicated in her chest, and she noticed her hands had gone cold inside her gloves. Finally, she packed away her trash, hung her food properly, and retreated to her tent. Inside, with the zipper closed and her sleeping bag pulled up to her chin, she felt marginally safer. She had a small canister of bear spray within reach, though she wasn't sure what good it would do against another person. The tent fabric was thin enough that her headlamp would show her silhouette clearly to anyone outside, so she turned it off and lay in the dark, listening. The footsteps didn't return, but about an hour later, When Emily was just starting to drift towards sleep, she heard something else. Humming, very faint, very distant. A woman's voice, or maybe a young man's, singing something without words. Just a simple melody, repetitive, the same 6 or 7 notes over and over. It came from the direction of the creek. Emily lay absolutely still, tracking the sound. It wasn't moving. Whoever was humming was standing in one place, just humming the same phrase over and over. Then it stopped, as abruptly as a radio being turned off. Emily didn't sleep well that night. Act 3. The Morning Discovery. Dawn came slowly, the darkness lifting in gradations so subtle that Emily couldn't identify the exact moment night became day. She dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every small sound, her mind conjuring threats from the crack of freezing wood and the settling of snow. When there was finally enough light to see inside the tent, she checked her phone. 7:43 a.m. She'd gotten maybe 4 hours of actual sleep. Emily dressed in layers, every movement feeling stiff and effortful in the cold. Her breath fogged inside the tent, and there was frost on the inner walls where her body heat had condensed and frozen. She unzipped the tent door, bracing for the slap of cold air. The campsite looked different in daylight, smaller, less threatening. The forest that had seemed like an impenetrable wall of darkness was just trees, Douglas fir and western hemlock, their branches heavy with snow. Pretty, even. The other tent platform was still empty, no new prints in the snow, no evidence that anyone had come closer during the night. Emily felt a wash of relief mixed with embarrassment. She probably overreacted. The footsteps could have been a deer or elk. The humming could have been wind in the trees, her tired brain interpreting natural sounds as human. She got her stove going and made coffee, instant but hot enough to burn her tongue. The morning routine helped. Boil water, add coffee, drink, pack up the tent, check the bear bag, organize the pack. She was just cinching down the top compression strap when she noticed the stones. During the night, someone had arranged a pattern of stones on the other tent platform. They hadn't been there yesterday. Emily was certain of that. She'd examined that platform carefully. There were 9 stones total, arranged in a 3x3 grid. Each stone was roughly the same size, about as big as her fist, and they'd been placed with obvious care, equal spacing, deliberate positioning. Emily walked over slowly, her coffee cup still in one hand. The stones were just stones, grey granite, probably collected from the creek bed. But the pattern felt significant in a way she couldn't articulate, like it was meant to communicate something. She crouched down, looking at them from different angles. Was it a tic-tac-toe board, a message in some kind of code, or just random arrangement that she was reading meaning into because she was unsettled? The snow around the stones was disturbed, boot prints layered over each other in that same confusing pattern she'd seen before. Someone had been here, in this camp, while she slept, standing on this platform, arranging these stones, probably not more than 30 feet from her tent. Emily's hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone to take a picture. Still no signal, but she wanted documentation, evidence of this happening in case she needed to explain something later. She was packing up the last of her gear when she saw the message. It was written in the snow at the edge of the clearing near the trailhead. Large letters drawn with a stick or finger, simple block capitals. Don't follow the markers. Emily's breath stopped. She walked over, reading it twice to make sure she wasn't misinterpreting. The letters were fresh, written recently enough that the edges were still sharp and clear. Markers. What markers? She looked around the clearing again, this time paying attention to things she might have dismissed as natural. And once she started looking, she saw them. Small cairns, stacks of 3 or 4 stones, placed at intervals around the perimeter of the camp. She counted 6 total. They were subtle, easy to miss if you weren't looking for them, but clearly man-made, and they seemed to point into the forest, away from the main trail, like breadcrumbs or trail markers or a lure. Emily's mouth went dry. Someone was playing a game, setting up a puzzle or a trap or a test, and she was apparently the audience. The rational response was to pack up and leave immediately, get back on the main trail and hike out. This had gone from mildly unsettling to actively threatening. But there was something else too, a small, defiant part of her that was angry. Angry that someone was trying to scare her. Angry that she'd finally worked up the courage to do this trip alone. And now, it was being contaminated by someone else's weird psychological games. She walked to the first cairn, the one nearest the message. Up close, she could see that the stones were arranged differently than normal trail cairns. 2 stones as a base, then a third balanced on edge rather than flat, unstable, almost designed to fall apart if you touched it. Beyond it, maybe 40 feet into the woods, she could see another small marker, and beyond that, a third one, barely visible. Emily stood there for a long moment, her pack on her shoulders, her bear spray clipped to her hip belt. The smart thing was obvious. Leave. Report this to the ranger station when she got back to civilization. But what would she report? Stones arranged in patterns, a message in the snow, footsteps and humming that could have been anything. It sounded crazy even in her own head. She made a decision. She'd follow the markers for just a few minutes, just to see where they led. If it was some kind of elaborate art installation or geocaching thing, she'd feel stupid for being scared. If it was something legitimately dangerous, she'd at least have better information to report. Emily checked her bear spray, made sure it was easily accessible. Then she took a photo of the message in the snow and began walking toward the first cairn. Act 4. The Trail. The cairns led deeper into the forest, away from the main trail and the campsite. Emily marked her route carefully, breaking small branches and piling snow against tree trunks every 20 feet or so. Basic wilderness navigation, the kind of thing her father had taught her when she was 12. The markers were placed at irregular intervals, sometimes close together, sometimes requiring a careful search to spot the next one. Whoever had made this trail knew what they were doing. The route avoided the thickest brush, found the easiest passages through the terrain. After about 10 minutes of slow, careful walking, Emily arrived at something unexpected. It was a second campsite, not an official one, but a space someone had clearly used for multiple nights. There was a tarp strung between trees, sagging under the weight of snow. A fire pit dug into the ground, surrounded by a windbreak made of stacked wood. A small pile of supplies under the tarp, a sleeping bag, a backpack, some cooking gear, but no person. Emily approached carefully, her hand on her bear spray. "Hello. Is anyone here?" Her voice disappeared into the forest, absorbed by snow and trees. She examined the camp without touching anything. The sleeping bag was a good one, similar quality to her own. The backpack was a women's cut, navy blue with pink accents. The supplies looked organized, cared for. This wasn't some homeless encampment or survival situation. This was someone who chose to be here. There was a notebook sitting on top of the backpack, spiral bound, the kind college students use. Emily knew she shouldn't look. It was a violation of privacy. But she also knew that something was deeply wrong here, and information might be the difference between safety and danger. She opened the notebook. The first few pages were normal. Trip planning notes, gear lists, food calculations. The handwriting was neat, feminine, organized. Then, about 10 pages in, the entries changed. Day 4. Saw someone on the main trail. Didn't approach. Need to be more careful about tracks. Day 5. The patterns help. Arranging stones helps. When I focus on the patterns, the other thoughts get quieter. Day 6. Another hiker at the official campsite. Woman, alone. Seems scared. Doesn't understand yet. Should I tell her? Should I warn her? Day 7. The forest is teaching me things. About silence. About repetition. About how humans are just patterns looking for other patterns. I used to think I was going crazy. Now I think everyone else is crazy, and I'm finally seeing clearly. The entries went on, becoming less coherent, more fragmented. References to markers and messages and lessons, something about the frequency and the clear space and learning to be still. Emily's hands were shaking as she flipped through the pages. This was someone having a mental health crisis. Someone who'd come out here and gotten lost in their own head, the isolation amplifying whatever they were struggling with. She needed to get help, get out, get to a ranger, get a search and rescue team back here. But as she turned to leave, she saw the final entry, written on the last page of the notebook in large, shaky letters. I'm sorry. I tried to warn you, but you followed the markers anyway. Now you're part of the pattern. Now you have to understand. Emily's blood went cold. There was a sound behind her, close, the crunch of snow under boots. She spun around, her hand fumbling for the bear spray, her heart slamming against her ribs. A woman stood at the edge of the clearing. She was maybe 40, maybe younger, her face weathered and her eyes hollow. She wore hiking clothes that looked like they hadn't been changed in days, and her hands were empty, held out in a gesture that could have been supplication or warning. You shouldn't have come, the woman said. Her voice was soft, almost kind. I tried to tell you. The message in the snow, but you followed anyway. Emily's thumb found the safety on her bear spray. I'm not here to bother you. I'm just camping. I'm leaving now. You can't. The woman took a step closer. Not until you understand. That's how it works. That's how the pattern completes. I don't know what you're talking about. Emily's voice came out steadier than she felt. I think you might need help. I can hike out, get a ranger, get you some assistance. The woman laughed, a sound that was more sob than humor. Assistance. That's what I thought too. That's what everyone thinks. But you can't get assistance for this. You can only understand it or not understand it. Understand what? That we're not alone out here. That we never were. The forest is. It's paying attention. Can't you feel it? Emily took a careful step backward, maintaining distance. I think you've been out here too long. Isolation can do things to your mind. It's not your fault. But you need to come back with me. I can't go back. The woman's voice cracked. I tried. I made it all the way to the trailhead once, got in my truck, turned the key, but I couldn't leave. Because once you see it, once you understand the pattern, you can't unknow it. You can't go back to pretending that human civilization makes sense. It's all just noise and chaos and people lying to themselves about meaning. Emily's training from a long ago psychology class kicked in. Don't argue with delusions. Don't challenge directly. Build rapport. Stay calm. Prioritize safety. Okay, she said gently. I hear you. That sounds really hard, but you're cold and probably hungry. Why don't we go back to my camp? I'll make you some hot food and we can talk about this. The woman stared at her for a long moment. Then she shook her head slowly. You still don't get it. But you will. Give it another day out here. Maybe two. The forest will show you. The patterns will start to make sense. And then you'll understand why I can't leave. Why I have to stay and complete the work. What work? The markers, the patterns, the messages. Someone has to maintain them. Someone has to keep the order. Otherwise, the chaos comes back. Emily realized with a sinking feeling that she wasn't going to be able to reason with this woman. Whatever was happening in her mind, it had its own logic, its own internal consistency. And more importantly, the woman wasn't acting overtly threatening. Strange, yes. Disturbing, absolutely. But not violent. I'm going to go now, Emily said carefully. Back to my camp. Then I'm hiking out. If you change your mind and want to come with me, I'll be at the official campsite for the next hour packing up. The woman didn't respond, just stood there with that hollow gaze, tracking something Emily couldn't see. Emily backed away slowly, keeping her eyes on the woman until she was far enough to turn and walk quickly. She retraced her route, following her broken branches and snow markers, moving as fast as she could without running. The whole time, she expected to hear footsteps behind her, expected the woman to follow, to try to stop her. But there was only silence. When Emily reached the official campsite, she didn't stop to rest. She grabbed her gear, her hands clumsy with adrenaline, and started toward the main trail. That's when she saw the second message, written in the snow near where the trail entered the clearing. The pattern isn't finished. And below it, an arrow made of stones, pointing back toward the forest. Act 5. The Choice. Emily stood frozen, staring at the message. Her rational mind was screaming at her to leave, to get out, to put distance between herself and whatever was happening here. But another part of her kept circling back to the woman's hollow eyes, the trembling hands, the notebook entries that charted a descent into something that looked like madness. She thought about what her therapist had said in one of their last sessions. Sometimes the thing that scares us and the thing we need to do are the same thing. Emily checked her watch. 9:17 a.m. She had the whole day. She packed a small bag with food, water, and a spare jacket, left the rest of her gear at the campsite. Then she followed the cairns again, back toward the hidden camp, calling out as she walked. The hidden camp was empty when she arrived. The tarp, the supplies, all still there. But no woman. Emily left the food and water in an obvious place, along with a note. You're not alone. You don't have to stay out here. I'm at the official campsite if you want to talk. Emily. She made it back to the official campsite by noon, set up her tent again, built a small fire, and waited. The woman appeared around 2 p.m., emerging from the tree line. She looked even more exhausted in full daylight, her skin pale, her movements slow. Emily stood up slowly. Hey, I'm glad you came back. The woman didn't speak at first, just stood at the edge of the clearing. Then, you left food. Yeah, are you hungry? A long pause, then a small nod. Emily heated water, made 2 cups of soup, handed one to the woman. They sat on opposite sides of the fire pit, not speaking, just drinking the hot liquid. Finally, the woman said, My name is Sarah. I've been out here for 16 days. I'm Emily. I've been out here for 1 day, and it's been one of the strangest days of my life. Sarah smiled faintly. Yeah, the forest does that. Sarah, I think you need to come back with me, back to the trailhead. We can get you help. I know. Sarah's voice was soft. I've known for a while now. Emily felt relief wash over her. Okay, good. We should go soon, before it gets dark. But first, we have to take down the markers, Sarah said. The cairns. I don't want anyone else to follow them. They spent the next hour dismantling the trail, scattering stones, erasing messages. Sarah worked methodically, almost ritualistically, and Emily found herself matching the rhythm. Stack, scatter, move on. Stack, scatter, move on. They hiked out together as the afternoon light lengthened. Sarah moved slowly but steadily. At one point, Emily offered her jacket when she noticed Sarah wasn't wearing gloves. Sarah shook her head. I'm okay. Are you sure? Your hands. I'm okay, Sarah repeated, and something in her tone made Emily not push further. At the 2-mile point, Emily saw the trekking pole she'd left marked with red tape. She stopped. Is this yours? Sarah looked at it for a long moment. Maybe. I don't remember. The blue pickup at the trailhead looked less ominous in the late afternoon light. Just a truck that had been sitting for a while. Emily helped Sarah get the heat running. There was cell signal here, and Emily called the ranger station, explained the situation. They said they'd meet them at Cascade Valley Hospital, about 40 minutes away. Emily drove behind Sarah's truck on the mountain highway. Sarah drove carefully, competently, like someone who hadn't been living in the forest for over 2 weeks. At the hospital, Emily parked and walked with Sarah to the entrance. Inside, the emergency room was bright and warm. A nurse approached, and Emily explained, exposure, possible malnutrition, mental health crisis. The nurse nodded, professional. We'll take care of her. You did the right thing. Sarah turned to Emily before following the nurse back. Thank you for not leaving. I almost did, Emily admitted. But you didn't. Sarah's eyes were clear, focused. That matters. Then she was gone, disappearing through the double doors. Emily sat in the waiting room for a while, filling out what limited information she had. She gave her own contact information, asked them to call if they needed anything else. The intake clerk was kind but busy. You should go home. Get some rest. It was fully dark by the time Emily got on the highway. She was exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tired that comes from adrenaline finally wearing off. She thought about calling Rachel, but decided to wait until morning when she could tell the whole story. She'd done something hard, something that mattered. Tomorrow she'd call to check on Sarah, make sure she was getting the help she needed. But that night, Emily just drove home, showered, and fell into bed, grateful for warmth and safety and her own space. A week later, Emily called Cascade Valley Hospital. I'm checking on a patient who was admitted last Friday evening, she said. Her name is Sarah. I don't know her last name. She was brought in for exposure and mental health crisis. I'm the one who brought her in. There was typing on the other end. A pause, more typing. I'm sorry, I'm not showing anyone by that name admitted last Friday. Can you give me more details? Emily felt something cold settle in her chest. Friday night, around 6 p.m. A woman, maybe 40, brown hair, exposure from camping. I called ahead from the trailhead. The ranger station was coordinating. Let me check with my supervisor. Emily waited, her phone pressed to her ear, her free hand gripping the edge of her kitchen counter. The woman came back. Mom, I've checked our records for the past week. We don't have any admission matching that description. Are you certain you have the right hospital? Cascade Valley Hospital, off Highway 2. I was there. I sat in your waiting room. I understand this is frustrating, but we have no record of this patient. If you're concerned about someone's welfare, you might try contacting the ranger station or local authorities. Emily hung up slowly. There had to be an explanation, a clerical error. Maybe Sarah had been transferred immediately to a psychiatric facility. Maybe she'd given a fake name. People in crisis did that sometimes, didn't they? Emily told herself these things as she made dinner, as she responded to work emails, as she got ready for bed. But the doubt stayed with her, small and persistent. Over the next few days, she found herself thinking about the trip constantly, replaying conversations, examining her memories for inconsistencies. Had Sarah really been there? Every interaction felt real in her mind. The weight of her arm on the trail, the sound of her voice, the notebook with its desperate entries. But she'd been so tired that day, emotional, sleep-deprived, running on divorce adrenaline and determination to prove something to herself. Could isolation work that fast? Could a single night in the woods make you see things that weren't there? Emily didn't know. What she did know was that she'd started doing something new, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly when it began. At work, she'd find her desk supplies arranged in small grids. 3 pens across, 3 pens down. At home, the stones she kept on her windowsill, collected years ago from various beaches, were no longer scattered casually. They formed patterns now, organized formations that looked almost deliberate. She'd moved them back to their random arrangement, but a few days later, they'd be organized again, and she wouldn't remember doing it.